Hello, everybody. This is Ken Krogh. Wow, it's been a while since I've been able to present. I've been looking forward to the first webinar that I've done in quite a while. As you guys may know, I've bouncing back from a pretty significant car accident, and I'm healthy enough now that I can't use it as an excuse anymore. Dang it! But actually, a little bit of mild brain trauma goes a long way to giving you a great excuse for when you forget things and when you drop the ball and offend people and say things that are wrong, which is happening all the time. But I think that may be more normal than because of my concussion treatment that I went through. But I want to tell you a bit about the cool journey that I've been through. This wonderful lady, Dr. Elena Fong of Cognitive FX, here in Provo, Utah, one of the world's renowned concussion treatment centers, the same group that has treated our buddy Tom Brady several times. In fact, he got so excited he got involved with the clinic back east, and you know, it's been in the news a lot lately. You know what happens to us old middle linebackers when we get hit to the head too many times. But I'm a big fan of this wonderful movie and the great work of Dr. Bennett Omalu that was portrayed by Will Smith in Concussion. If you haven't had a chance to see that, please do. But I wanted to, just catch you up on some of the newest things happening here at InsideSales.com. We've been busy getting back to basics, but what we found is that the core sales model that we originally invented has evolved. It's changed a little bit. In fact, I go back clear to 2010, this blog post by one of our members of our board of directors, Lars Leckie. He entitled it Upcoming Freemium Summit. He talked about the high velocity business model, and he was one of the first to really use that model, or that name. And he and I powwowed back and forth for quite a bit, and I said, that would be a really, really cool name for the business model that we've discovered based on using speed to make more calls faster. And if you remember the story, it all started back in 2007 with this gentleman, Dr. James Oldroyd. He was just finishing his PhD at Kellogg University up in Chicago and had one more research survey he had to do before he graduated with his PhD. And it was interesting. We were moving along. We'd been in business about 3 or 4 years by this time. We had the name InsideSales.com, and it brought in lots and lots of leads from Google and from the web. So we didn't have to do any cold calling. In fact, none for the first 5 years. We relied instead on inbound marketing. That phrase was made famous from our buddies over there at HubSpot. In fact, my good friend Mark Roberts, who was over sales and marketing at HubSpot, is now a Harvard professor. So I got to hang with him a little while recently. They did a full case study on InsideSales.com up at Harvard, and I was invited up to spend some time with him. And we compared notes about those early days of inbound marketing and all the impact that has had. But we were getting so many inbound leads, our closers were watching all the nuances of what made up a really good lead. And one day they came to me, a couple of sales guys came to me and said, Ken, it seems like when we respond really fast to the leads, we make the sale. And I said, wait a minute, speed? It's speed, it's not price or quality or service. And they said, yeah, we've all learned about it. So we called up this friend of ours, James Older at the time, he was just about ready to graduate with his PhD. And we ran the idea past him and asked if we could do a research survey with him at Kellogg. He got it approved, and we put in all kinds of effort. We partnered with Info USA at the time, sent out the email survey to 400,000 companies, and got the data back, did the analysis, and proved beyond a shadow of a doubt. Now remember, this was early 2007. That nobody had any idea how fast you should respond to leads. So Dr. Oldroyd graduated and went on to work at MIT, and we called him back a few weeks later and said, hey, that survey didn't help us a lot. We need, and he said, well, you need to do a study, and you're going to need data. So And he said, and the hard thing is the data is pretty hard to find. You got to have call center data to see how many calls you make and how fast you make them. That's got to be coupled with CRM data about what actually happens to the call. Does it close? Does it, the appointment set? Things like that. And we said, well, boy, we didn't explain it very well, but that's actually what we do. We were the first company in the world to blend dialer technology inside of a hosted CRM solution. And so that was our roots. That's what we started with. And we sent in the data. In fact, the biggest move we made at that point was to change the terms and conditions on our customer base and run it past everybody. And then that would allow us to use all of their data. And now the data had to be de-identified. But we could use that data. We sent it to Dr. Oldroyd. And that proceeded to bring forth a research study that changed the entire landscape of sales and marketing. Over 650,000 people have downloaded that study. And I'm going to demonstrate that in just a little bit here. But let me tell you a little bit more about what we're going to talk about today. I call it the 7 strategies of a high velocity model for enterprise. And now it's interesting because a lot of people say, well, you don't use the high velocity model to sell to enterprise. And I said, you know what? You're probably right. That's more of an account-based model. But high velocity and account-based do not actually compete with each other if you define it clearly. High velocity means to do more faster. Velocity means speed. And you can use that just as well with an account-based model as you can with a small business model. The second big issue is a big strategy is virtual, to do things remotely and to simulate a face-to-face sales call. We're going to talk about the latest research on cadence and content and how those two have to go together. We're going to talk about it's all about the leads. And remember, this whole thing started with the inbound marketing model and immediate response technology. Then we're going to share some really new and interesting strategies around qualifying leads before they ever even get to the salespeople by qualifying it in the data. There's huge leverage here. And then we're going to give you some updates on specialization. Now, you know me, I've been a fan of specialization for about 15 years. But I have to tell you that the world has changed pretty significantly. And there's now some areas where specialization can just kill you. And we've got to learn from other industries that over-specialized. So there's now actually some areas where you're going to want to do a bit of a hybrid of what we call a specialized generalist. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to give you, once again, the leading indicators that allow you to make course corrections before the end of the month when it's too late to change the outcome. So here we go. Let's jump in, everybody. So strategy number 1, velocity. Do more faster. Now, it's not just about speed. By doing things faster, it allows you to do more things in the same period of time. It's called a turn rate. In retail, that would be an inventory turn rate. So if you sell lots of stuff in a day, then you move through your inventory a lot faster. So it's a combination of doing more and doing it faster. It's the one thing you can control. Now, we mentioned Dr. Oldroyd and the research that he did for us first at Kellogg, then at MIT. And then this very, very landmark study came through that he did in conjunction with Harvard Business Review and our own CEO, Dave Elkington. And that was basically the same study we did years earlier, but with 100 times the amount of data. Now, I told you earlier that lead response study has over 650,000 people have accessed it. Companies have accessed it over the last 7 years, 6.5 years. Well, let's quickly go through it because it's still as relevant as ever. We just did it again, and it's actually, we're responding slower than we've been in years past, you guys. I'm going to share that in just a minute. So guess what? It's more relevant than ever, and speed is still of great essence on the internet. So the first thing we got from Dr. Oldroyd is that time of day is very important to increase the amount of qualified and leads and contactable leads. And what we found is in the morning, 8 a.m., and the evening, 4 to 5 p.m., are the best times to call to increase contact rates. versus around lunchtime. You can see that huge dip at lunchtime. Now, guys, that's 147% lift in contact rate. Our research, I'll show you here in just a bit, says that contact rates are the single biggest obstacle for salespeople. So just to put this in perspective, the entire series, in fact, this was a landmark study done about when we started our company by my friend Barry Traylor at CSO Insights, showed a 17% lift in sales by using a CRM package versus not. Now, in alarming recent events, the last 2 years, for the first time since he's been doing the study over 22 years ago, Barry warned the industry and said, guys, CRM usage is slipping. And people say it's because of the apps and things that are coming along, but I believe it's also because we've backed away from our discipline, from our process model. And we've also seen a lot of the key statistics go down the last couple of years. So I'm making a call for everybody to get back to basics and get back to your CRM solutions, you guys. Now, sales skills, by hiring a sales trainer to come into the sales methodology, on average boosts things about 22%. Now, remember, I just showed you a lift of contact rates of 147% increase in productivity. So that's 5 or 6 times the level of leverage that having a CRM or even investing in sales skills offers. Now, the next one is not time of day, but it's actually day of week. We compared the best times days to be calling and found that Wednesdays and Thursdays were the best compared to Tuesdays, which for some reason is the worst. That's a 49% lift. That's huge, you guys. But the biggest single lift is exactly what our salespeople said. And if you remember, they came in and said, when we call back really fast, we seem to make the sale. So this was the graph from the original MIT study. It's been made a lot prettier since those days. With our graphic design department, they do a great job, you guys. But notice that the response tends to just fall off a cliff. The contact rates drop dramatically within the first 5 minutes. And that's actually what we found happening. And Dr. Oldred called up and says, you know what, your salespeople were right. If you can call a lead back almost immediately within the first 5 minutes, the odds of making contact are 100 times higher. And I asked him, I said, do you mean 100%? And he said, nope, 100 times higher. I thought, oh my gosh, that's crazy. And the second thing was that the ability to qualify that lead and move it into the sales funnel were 21 times higher. Now that was huge as well. We did a research study following up after this, and we checked on how fast companies actually respond to their leads, and we found that the average time frame was 39 hours. So in other words, if someone comes to your website on a Wednesday, fills out a lead, sends it to your sales department, the average time that they respond to that lead is 39 hours. Now that was the standard for years and years, but we just did a recent study, late 2016, and that time delay dropped to 44 hours. So guys, we're getting worse. We're not getting better. This same level of discipline is as important as ever. So immediacy and speed was the main thing we learned, and that was the root of the high-velocity sales model. It's all about speed. Now, with that same study, we studied what we call persistence. Persistence is how many times you actually make a call attempt. And it's interesting because the research study showed that the average salesperson only makes 1.5 sales calls to follow up on a lead before they just give up. Now, we found that the best practice, if you want to ring about 90% of the value of lead sources that you're given, is to make 6 attempts. You know, I talk to salespeople all the time and say, well, it doesn't sound like they want to talk to me. Well, the truth is they don't even think about you. When you leave a message or make one phone call, they're busy. So you got to be pleasantly persistent, like my old friend Troy Fulmer, who never gives up. The guy just never gives up. And that's how we need to be, you guys. We need to keep following up, following up, following up, because that's what it takes in a world where everybody is busy. Now, some pretty good news. This study was done back in 2007. It still is relevant today. Again, we refreshed it again with the Harvard Business Review. But when I was out with my injury, I came to a realization that that's really who we are here at Inside Sales. And so I went to Dave Elkington, my business partner, and said, look, Dave, you know, we need to really light up our research again and get back into testing. And so when I came back, we decided to form what we call Inside Sales Labs. And we've now done 5 research studies, 1 a month for 5 straight months. Probably my favorite one is this one right here. I would recommend, in fact, I think we've got it available for you. It's a study where we studied millions of data points through our new product HD Forecast, which lets us track forecasting reliability and increase forecasts from about an average. In fact, my buddy Barry Traylor says the average forecast accuracy is 47.8% for a sales forecast at the end of the month to see if you're going to hit your number or not. He said, Ken, that's worse than flipping a coin. So, but with our research and our product HD forecast, we're in the low 80% range, which is a huge increase. But we took the data from that product, and we went out and we started looking for some really interesting research around what happens at the end of the month when we try and push really hard with companies who might not be ready. And what we found, in fact, the study is called Time-Based Closing Strategies, the High Cost of Procrastination, or Waiting to the End of the Month. And what we found is that, yeah, we make more sales on the last day of the month. It goes up about 2.5 times more sales. But guess what? We also pull forward sales that probably aren't ready, and we pitch and miss over 11 times more sales. So yeah, we make more, but we lose a lot more. And that's a major, major problem, and that's right there in that study. It teaches you that what you should do is adjust your strategies to close earlier in the month. We give you about a bunch of ideas to do that, and we invented a brand new word. In fact, you can see it in my bit.ly URL there. Instead of procrastination, which is waiting to the end, we call it precrastination, which is moving it upstream and doing it a little bit earlier and planning ahead, you guys. So that study right there is my first recommendation. I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 things I'm going to recommend that you do here in the webinar today. And let's keep going to strategy number 2. Strategy number 2 is virtual. Now, I was in Rome speaking to Cisco's. They've got, oh my gosh, thousands of sales reps. I was talking to the inside sales teams, and they had come up with what I've decided is a really cool name for the inside sales model, and they call it virtual sales. Virtual is sort of simulation of live. And it took me a while to let it grow on me, but it really has, and I think it's great. You know, I was on a United Airlines flight right around that time, and I read an article where United Travel Services compared their inside sales teams to their outside sales teams, inside being virtual, outside face-to-face. And they found that the inside reps had about a 16% close rate. The outside reps had a 40% close rate. Now that's 2.5 times better, you guys, going face-to-face. But they found that the inside sales reps made 7 times more contacts. So that sort of changed the whole model. Now what we recommend is actually a hybrid of the two. We recommend that you spend most of your time going virtual and remote, but then go face-to-face occasionally and use the power of what we call live media to improve the relationship and the close ratio. So this is what we call the assertiveness continuum. It moves between the 4 kinds of media. Social media is first, and it is by far the most passive, but it has a huge reach, and it builds awareness. Then you move to what's called digital media, with digital downloads and basically demand generation. Then you move to virtual media, and virtual is where you are able to simulate a face-to-face call remotely. And it can be video-based, which we love the most. It can be webinars with GoToMeeting or WebEx or Join.me, or just a phone call or Skype. Those are all ways to engage in a virtual sales model. But then live is still the strongest. and that's where the enterprise really excels. But all of these media are now coming together, and we have to be good at using all of them. But the basic rule is this: always bridge to a more assertive media. So if you meet someone with a social media, bridge to digital, then bridge to virtual. And when there's a chance, go live face-to-face, and that's going to be your very best media for building relationships and causing sales to occur. So for us, the virtual sales world is all about simulating face-to-face. A lot of people think it was the phone that really invented inside sales, but it was not. It was GoToMeeting and WebEx and Join.me and these web conferencing tools that allow us to simulate as if we're face-to-face without the cost of travel and the time cost for both buyers and sellers. It's a big, big shift. Now, again, as I mentioned, my favorite is still video. That's the richest environment, but it's still not really caught the traction. I was hoping, although it is incorporated into a lot of these WebEx and GoToMeeting interfaces, but video, I think, is still a technology to be expanded upon for inside sales. Now, virtual has really caught on. About 4 or 5 years ago, we decided to pioneer with our partner on for the world's largest virtual trade show in the sales world. We set the world record the first year we did it and broke it again the second year, the third year, and the fourth year. This last year we had 34,700 people register and be involved with over 80 leading business experts, you know, with Steve Young and Jim Steele and Matt Dixon and others. And this has been something that's completely changed the way things are done. And virtual is all about doing things remotely and simulating face-to-face. So let's talk strategy number 3, cadence and content. So this is something that I'm really excited about and amazed about. Cadence has become a really hot word lately, but it's funny because it's been around a long, long time. And I want to throw a wrench in the works here just a little bit and put out a new way of thinking. That's sort of what I do. I think laterally. And let's talk about what cadence even is. Cadence is like standing on the front door or from front porch of a home and knocking on the door. And if knocking doesn't work, then you ring the doorbell. But the real question is, what happens when they open the door? Cadence is how many times you do something. But what really matters is the content of what you say. So cadence is nice to have a sequence of all kinds of ways to try and reach somebody. But what we have found, you guys, is that it's really about the content. What happens when they open the door? What do you say? How do you get in the door? How do you build a relationship? How do you nurture from awareness to engagement? This is one of our favorite content models. We call it the acquire model. And it's the process, it's used best through social and digital media, of nurturing people from, they don't even know who you are, so starting with awareness, moving to curiosity. Now my favorite, now notice the acronym here, acquire, and to the right is the stages of acquire. Curiosity is best peaked with research. And then quality, we spelled quality wrong. It should be qualify. So Q is qualify, and what that means is you start moving for authority and need and urgency and money, and we'll talk about qualify in a little bit later. U is unique, I is interest, R is relevancy, and E is engage. So there's a lot, in fact, I'll be talking a lot about that in a webinar all of its own as we start using content with Cadence, but this is just a bit of an overview here today. So let's move on to strategy number 4. It's all about the lead. So, you know, this is probably my favorite. I get a lot of questions from people say, Ken, what's the difference between a lead and a list? And I remember when I was at Franklin Covey, this was in the early 90s where I really got into inside sales in a big way. It was 1993 when I started the inside sales department at Franklin Covey. And we became the second fastest growing company in the United States. And my department was the fastest growing department in that company for 4 straight years. We were the largest training company in the world. My job was to put on about 300 seminars a month in conjunction with my friends in the marketing department, the public seminar marketing department. And the problem was I was cold calling. I was calling from lists one day, and I remember walking down the hallway, and there was one of the receptionists, and her job was to type in stacks of these cards that came from the Franklin Day Planners. And on those cards, there was a little checkbox that says, "Are you interested in a time management seminar?" And I looked down, and here I am cold calling, and she has an entire stack of people who says, "Hey, I'm interested. Call me back." Even had phone numbers on it, you guys. And so I said, what do you do with this stack of leads here? She says, "Oh, these are just cards that come out of the millions of Franklin Day Planner refills that we get." She says, "I get stacks like this every week." I says, "Oh my gosh, what do you do with them?" And she says, "Well, I type in their address and send them a catalog, and then I just throw the cards away." And I about fell over. So I said, "Give me that card stack." And so I grabbed them, and I went running back to my sales teams, and I handed them out. And I said, "Call these guys as fast as you can." And when we did, we got about a 25% close ratio. It was incredible. And all of a sudden, I found for the first major time the power between a list and a lead. And a lead is where everything's at. I'm going to tell you what a lead is here in just a minute. But I want to talk about some research we're just finishing. I hinted this just a little bit in our Accelerate conference up at Snowbird just recently. First time we rolled it out, we're just finishing up. And we've had some help from, I want to call out Anna Cassili and Boston Consulting Group and my friend Barry Traylor, who submitted a couple of the questions for this study. It's the top sales executive challenges for 2017. And I want all of you to look at challenge number 1. There it is, you guys. The number 1 biggest challenge for sales executives is lead quantity and quality by a pretty good margin. And number 2 is pipeline management and forecasting, you guys. And number 3 is prospecting. Well, prospecting is really another way to say lead quantity and quality. So I'm telling you, it's all about the leads. And that's strategy number 4. We've got to get better at lead demand generation and lead qualification. So that's where I spend a lot of time in the high velocity sales model. So this study will be out soon. I don't have it available to offer to you yet, so I'm going to kick my team in the labs team in the butt here to get it done. But watch for that. That's a big one. Okay, top executive sales challenges. Now, there's 2 more slides I want to run past you here. We divided those up into process and people challenges. So just to do a drill down, the top 5 process-related challenges, again, just as I mentioned, lead quantity and quality was first. In fact, it's interesting. The process challenges were the most urgent of them all. The top 3 of all challenges were process-related, not people-related. If we go to the next slide, people-related, you can see recruiting and hiring, performance management, training, and then culture and internal politics. Now, these are the first time some of these topics have even arisen in any of our top challenges studies. Every year for almost 9 years, we have done a top challenges study for managers and for sales reps, but this is the first time we've done it for top sales executives. So I'm just going to give you a really quick summary over the last 4 or 5 years for sales reps. And look at this. Top sales rep challenges, number 1 by far, lead quantity and quality, just like the execs, you guys. Clear back to 2013. Lead quantity and quality, there it is. So I hope I'm driving the point home. It's all about the leads. It's all about the leads. So if you don't have a strong relationship with your marketing department, you're going to have real troubles hitting your numbers because that's where it all works. If you're doing cold calling and self-sourcing, you're not going to have enough resources there, you guys. So what's the difference with a lead and a list? Well, a lead has need. They raise your hand and come to you and say, look, I'm interested in learning more to see how relevant this is, while a list only has interest. And the list doesn't know who you are. So, but what we've learned recently, some of our most recent research is that need is split into 2 kinds of need. And we'll talk about that for just a minute. What we call perceived need and situational need. So let's talk about that. Perceived need is what the person thinks they need. Situational need is what they actually need, okay? So if I perceive I need you, but I don't actually need you, if I buy your product, I'm probably not going to use it. So of the two, we believe situational need is the most important. If you don't have, in other words, for example, we did some data study, and I'll show you these slides here in about 10 more slides. I'm going to show you what we do in-house, you guys. People always ask us, what is the data structure that InsideSales.com uses? I'm going to show it to you in just a bit. But what we found is if a company uses Salesforce.com or Microsoft Dynamics, they probably need us, especially if they also have a marketing automation tool like Marketo or Eloqua or Acton Software or HubSpot. They probably need us if they got the combination of those, especially if they have an inside sales department, if they're growing, and so on. So that's called situational need. They may never have heard of InsideSales.com, but if they need us, that's situational. If they've heard of us and recognize they need us, that's called perceived need. So you see how that works? So let's talk about this for a minute. So what happens if perceived need is low and situational need is high? Well, that's where all you got to do is educate. You got to help, and that's a good sale right there. It's not a great one. The best one is if perceived need's high and situational need is high. That's a slam dunk, ready to go sale. But here's the problem. What if the perceived need is high and the situational need is low? That one is scary. That one basically means they don't need you, and you might sell them, but guess what? They're going to attrit. They won't use it, and they're going to hate you. So don't go there. Now, you can change their situation, but that takes a lot of work. I'm going to show you the matrix here. So this is the need matrix. You can see on the left the situational need from low to high and the perceived need also from low to high along the axis there. The ideal is the green that has high situation and high perceived need. If it's high situational need and low perceived need, then all you got to do is educate. But the problem is, if there's low situational need on either way, that's a major challenge, because it means you got to do a lot of heavy lift and maybe help them get a CRM or whatever they need to do to be able to use your product. Okay, so let's keep going here. Let's move to strategy number 5. It's called qualify the data. Now this is a whole different kind of world here, you guys. And if you remember, I quoted earlier a stat from my friend Barry Traylor, CSO Insights. Again, they were bought by Miller Heiman about a year ago, and one of the biggest training company in the world, pretty much. Really, really cool stuff with strategic selling and conceptual selling. Boy, I'd really recommend, if you haven't had a chance to go through either of those courses, especially for enterprise, the strategic selling course from Miller Heiman for enterprise is a must. You gotta have that in your background. But here's what he said. He said in 2015, sales had a 47.8% accuracy rate in predicting pipeline. And he laughed. He said, that's worse than flipping a coin, you guys. So what we're going to try and do is talk about how do you align and qualify the data before you even make the call. Because if you don't, if you just treat everybody the same, this is what you're going to look like. The green bars are the amount of effort you put in, but the close rate is that graph behind it. And what you can see is you're putting the same amount of effort with every prospect. And that is a formula for a lot of wasted time and a lot of missed quota. What you really should be doing is this next model here, where you align your efforts with the potential close rate, okay? So that's where you're really going to have a lot more wins, a lot more success, is if you align your efforts. This is basically just working smart, you guys. It's become a cliche. But let's get serious about qualifying the data. So how do we do that? Well, you have to have a model. And the model that's been around since the early 60s was done by IBM. It's called BANT. And hopefully you've heard about it. If you haven't, you've been living under a sales rock somewhere, you guys. You're missing out. But sad to say, that model is pretty well dead, okay? 2010 research was done, again in 2012. And my friend Trish Bertuzzi jokes that asking for budget as the very first thing you do in your conversation with a prospective sale is like asking for W-2 forms on the first date. This is a W-2 form here. I hope we took the name off. No, we did. We better move on so you can't see who it was. This is the research study that changed everything, and it basically showed that only 20% of companies actually make purchase decisions based on a predefined annual budget. So if only 2 out of 10 companies even use a budget to make decisions, why are we starting with budget? Well, we asked that research when we started seeing the blogs come out saying BANT is dead, and we were the company that invented this new model called ANUM. And what we did, you can see, is we moved the order of things around. We put the budget or money at the end, and we moved authority to the first, because what we learned is if you don't get to the person with authority or power, you're not going to make the sale. But the real critical piece of this model is the second step, it's need. And see the asterisks? That's because our research showed that of the 4 elements, need was the most important, and here's why. If the need is high enough, they'll figure out the urgency and the money, you guys. If I need you, I'll buy from you right now, and I'll find the money if I need you bad enough. So that's basically the model, and there's been some really cool research recently that shows that this thing is really working well. In fact, this comes from a study done by Topo. I'm going to show you the actual blog that launched it here in just a minute. But the bright green is BANT, the dark, almost black is ANUM, and the bluish color is AN, which is just a derivative of ANUM. It just means find authority and need, and don't even worry about urgency and money on that first call. And here's what we found. Look at this, guys. AN is used 14% more than BANT on inbound calls. But look at this. For outbound calls, it's 120% more used than BANT. And for hybrids that's both inbound and outbound, it's got an 18% lift. And this is the actual blog where the research study was rolled out by Topo. And it shows that today only 27% of companies even use BANT anymore. Although we still hear it out there. There's some pretty big companies. In fact, 3 weeks ago, I was consulting with a major telecom company, and they still talk about BANT. So we need to do our best to help them move into the 21st century. ANUM and AN is really where you need to go. So let's talk about, I promise you, how do we actually use ANUM or the qualification model in the data? So here's what we've done, you guys. I'm going to walk you through 2 slides, and boy, number 7 there, the little thing moved out of the column. Sorry, that was my problem with my slide here. But these are the 10 data points that we asked our top sales reps several years ago. We said, look, guys, what do you need for the perfect lead? And they gave us about 20 data points. They gave us 10 for company and 10 for contact, which I'll show you in a minute. And the very first one is just what I said, pre-existing technology. For example, do they use Salesforce? Now, this is our list, you guys. Why am I showing it to you? Because you know what? We've learned that if we show you why we do things, what we do, and how they do them, it will help you be more successful. And so this is actually our very model. We call it Manualytics, which is a predecessor of our Neurolytics. And Manualytics is where you do it by hand. And this is where it all started years ago. We do it by hand. So imagine each of these 10 questions is worth 5 points. So you could get a score from 0 to 50 on the company data. And look at this. 7 of the 10 questions are based on need. So company is about need. And contact, which is the next slide, or the person in authority, is more about authority. So contact data are these 10 points. Now this is absolute gold, you guys. When we go in with an organization, this is the kind of stuff that has the biggest lift. And so what we've done is we've just built manual approaches where we are able to objectively score data points. This is actually from a screenshot of one of the screens where we use what we call Manualytics. And this was in the early days of Neurolytics. So notice that the score, the totally qualified opportunity score, this is a 61 out of 100. But look at, in the blue there, look at company score, it's a 41, and contact score, it's a 20. The percent complete is 100%. That means all 20 fields are filled out, and this is then able to provide a score. But notice, in fact, let's think about this for a minute. If this company score is high, that means they probably need us, but the contact score is low, that means that person doesn't have a lot of authority. So what do we do? Well, we'd go look for someone else at the same company because that's a great company score. That means they need us. We're just talking to the wrong person. So Josiane Fagan, who always talks about avoiding the no-po, or in other words, the person with no power, this objectively in the data lets you figure that out, and it tells you right where to go. So this is what we recommend you do, is you qualify the data before it ever gets to the salesperson, if at all possible. It's going to help them know right where to go. So again, we coined the phrase manualytics, and it was the precedent, it preceded neurolytics, but that's really a model. And what it does is it helps you find what we call the pathway to power. Now the pathway to power, this is what we call a circle of influence here. And typically, all of these people are involved in a sale if you have a complex product that requires a lot of buying. Now this is more the account-based model, but we find the same thing with high velocity. You still got to talk to a lot of people. So what we recommend you do using the qualification within the data is you look for what we call the pathway to power. So what we recommend you do is you score the different people involved in the decision process. And here you can see the champion was the VP of Sales Ops. They got a 65. Then they went to the influencer, which is the VP of Demand Gen, got a 72. Went to the primary influencer, which was the sales director, which got us into the VP Sales and had a 95 on power and authority. So that's a perfect way to use neurolytics, but based on manualytics, and you can do it yourself. That's how it works. So anyway, let's keep going, but it's critical that we understand strategy number 5, qualify the data. Okay, strategy number 6, specialization. Now I warned you, I'm going to do a pretty big about face today on specialization, you guys. And let me tell you why. We've been preaching specialization now for 13 years. And it has had a massive impact on the industry. Well over half of the sales companies have specialized in a pretty dramatic way. But there are still lots of organizations that are pure generalists. Well, here's what we found. This same trend began in the Industrial Revolution when people specialized, and I'll show you that here in a minute, based on the assembly line model of Henry Ford. But the problem is, as you get bigger and more bureaucratic, those specialist positions become silos. And the problem is if you try and hand off to the next stage in the process, the biggest single danger is that you drop the baton. Now, in fact, let me tell you a little about this book right here, Reengineering the Corporation. This came out, boy, it's been out a long time actually. Michael Hammer and James Champion. I read it and it completely blew my mind. It tells the story of, in fact, several organizations, but the one that comes to mind the most was a utility company that was drowning in overhead. Very little was getting done. They weren't getting orders through. In fact, it was taking almost a month to get an order through. So these guys came in and said, look, let's re-engineer the process by which you do things. And they said, well, what do we do? They said, well, let's take an order from start to finish and just hand carry it through the process and just see what's involved. Because remember, an order to turn up new services for this a utility company was taking 31 days. That's crazy. So they took the order and they walked it through by hand, and they found that there were 17 different specialists involved who had to touch that order. Well, here's the problem. The order would sit in people's inboxes. And they found, they actually pulled out a stopwatch and they timed the amount of time it actually took to process the order. And guess how much time it took? It took about 15 or 20 minutes. But it was taking 31 days. Now this is an extreme because of all the handoffs and the inboxes and people waiting on others to do their job. So that's a prime example of what we call dropping the baton. Now this is one of the most embarrassing moments, this slide here, in U.S. Olympic history. This was 2008 at the Beijing Olympics, and these were the men and women's relay race teams. And as you can see, catastrophe struck when all of a sudden the women's team dropped the baton, and about 30 minutes later, the men's team were running, and they dropped the baton, and we lost both races, hands down, didn't even come close. Now, we were expecting to do really well, but guess what, folks? If you drop the baton when it's required to have a handoff, you're dead. You can't go back and win. Now, to the credit of the women, they picked up the baton and still finished the race. But it didn't matter because they didn't win. They didn't even place. So that's the danger of a specialization model that runs amok, is you start slowing things down and dropping the baton, and you have what we call decay. Now, this is a research study we did internally that shows how fast contact rates, qualification rates, and close rates decay over the course of about 4 days. The green line there is show rates or contact rates, show-up rates to appointments being set and then held. And you can see on day 0, there's over a 60% show rate, but 4 days later, it's below 30%. Now, that's a huge amount of decay and delay because of specialization and putting things out too far. So what do we recommend you do? Well, one of the best models, I don't have a lot of time to go into it right now, but it's a model from a book called Flawless Execution from a company called Afterburner. My friends at the AAISP, American Association of Inside Sales Professionals, just hired Hot Lips Houlihan. He's a consultant who used to be a pilot in the American military, and he came and gave a seminar on this brief debrief model. And basically, it's the model that you use when you have to coordinate between specialists. And the key is this: you start with a briefing on what you're trying to accomplish, you run your mission for the day, and then you do a debrief afterwards to improve what you've learned. So that's basically a quality loop, and this is how you improve handoffs between specialists. And if you don't have this model in place, you're probably experiencing delay and decay. So go get that book, Flawless Execution. It will change your entire business. Now, what was it that originally put the specialist model on the map? Well, that was back to Dr. James Oldroyd in that first Kellogg study in 2007 when he found a 7-point higher close rate between specialists and generalists. Now, we have still found that that is the case, but the problem is the high-velocity model has suffered dramatically from specialization that doesn't have a really good brief, debrief, and an automation model in place. So specialization has increased close rates, but it's also slowed things down dramatically. So let's talk about where this whole idea of specialization originally came from. Well, it started with this gentleman right here, Eli Whitney. Everybody knows him as the person who invented the cotton gin, but most people don't know he's the one who invented interchangeable parts during the Civil War, the U.S. Civil War. When guns were being made by artisans by hand, if you broke a trigger guard, you basically were out of commission. But if all you had to do was change out the trigger guard for another one, then you'd be up and going again immediately. So he's the one that first came up with interchangeable parts, and it changed the whole Industrial Revolution, because right after him was the pioneer of the manufacturing assembly line, Henry Ford. And this is, you know, cranking out the Model Ts that completely changed the American way of life by allowing people to have a life and have a middle class emerge. But the assembly line is only part of it. Right after the assembly line, the conveyor belt is really the key. This is Amazon. That conveyor belt is actually what keeps things moving. It keeps the velocity going. And the velocity is really the key to a high velocity model. If you have a conveyor belt that doesn't move on its own and keep things going, then it slows down, and specialization actually makes things much, much worse. So there's a new trend that's started to get some real traction. And my friends at Digital Marketer, Ryan Dice, mentioned it recently, and it really got me looking. So I've been researching what's called the Special Generalist. Now, this is an article that came out in Harvard Business Review that I'd recommend you have a look at. And it's a new approach to specialization, and let me show you what it means. In fact, this article on Forbes, and by the way, I'm trying to get going right in for Forbes again, but it talks about the secret power of the generalist. And it all comes down to a model called T-shaped people. And what that means is the horizontal bar of the T is more of a generalist, but it's someone who's willing to collaborate with all kinds of other people. And the vertical bar on the T is still that specialization, depth of expertise and skill around one key area. But this model of a specialist who's willing to generalize their expertise and skill across the organization is really where the leverage is. And I've had some lessons to learn about that myself, and I hope we all can really embrace the ability to, again, specialize around expertise, but share it and collaborate with the other people in your organization if you're willing, if you're really going to improve this whole high-velocity sales model. So let's move on. Strategy number 7. Here we go. This is leading indicators. Now, the outside sales model, the field sales model, the traditional sales model has really focused on what's called lagging indicators, or in other words, do we hit our goal at the end of the month? A leading indicator would be how many calls am I making, how many appointments am I setting, how many proposals have I sent that indicate if I've got an average close rate of 10%, you know, have I teed up 100 opportunities so that I have the 10 sales that I need to hit my number? Now, I'm an old football coach. Now, that's American football, and I have to tell you that when I was in Rome talking to Cisco, there was only a small contingent of my colleagues from America who when I started making football analogies, really got what I meant, because the rest of them were focused on what the world thinks football is. But in American football, as you know, you have to make it 10 yards in 4 attempts in order to keep the ball and keep moving down the field. That's a good example of what we call leading indicators. Now, there are 3 main kinds of leading indicators. There's quantity, which is how many of things you do. There's quality, which is how well you do them. And then there's a new one that I call service level. Now, it's an old stat from the world of call centers, for inbound call centers, but it's fairly new for inside sales departments. And what service level means is how fast do you get back to people when they're trying to reach out to you. So all 3 leading indicators are absolutely critical. I've got a brand new book coming out called The High Velocity Sales Model, and we'll be talking more about that. But let me just show you this last key slide here, because these are the 7 qualifiers, excuse me, the 7 leading indicators that I find make the most impact in the world of inside sales. Now, there are 7 of them, and I call them the levers of inside sales. Now, a couple years ago, I hired a gentleman to come in with one of these massive backhoes and dig out a foundation for a big RV garage that I put in my backyard. It was huge. And this guy dug and dug and dug, and I noticed he had 4 levers for his hands and 3 pedals for his feet. So there were 7 things he did to move, and he literally created a mountain of dirt. He moved a mountain with 7 simple levers. And these are the 7 levers: more calls, better calls, more leads, better leads, and then mapping, profiling, and qualifying. I want to talk about them for just a moment, and then we'll be done. But number 1, and they're in order of ease, but they move to order of power, okay? So the easiest thing you can do is just make more calls. That's just a decision, you guys. We were just working with a company the other day, a major company, good friends of ours, and we walked in there and we engaged with our Seek product and several other areas, you know, in terms of gamification and so on. And then we showed them the key is to really leverage this thing. This thing is like a Gatling gun. Now, they were excited because we also had neurolytics and they were able to use predictive analytics and things like that. But the first thing they did is they tripled the amount of calls that they made. And their quota was at 65%. And then 3 or 4 months later, now their sales cycle is about 52, 58 days, somewhere in there. And by tripling the amount of calls, guess what happened 2 to 3 months later? They went from 65% of quota to 101% of quota. Now that's a pretty big deal, you guys. The laws of sales cannot be broken. You can only break yourselves against them. So that's where you start. Make more calls. Number 2 is make better calls. That involves increasing the skill set of what you say when they open the door. More leads, that's marketing, increasing the volume of leads. But better leads is using that qualify the data approach we've already talked about to increase the likelihood that the person that's responded has perceived need and situational need. Better leads. Now, step 5 is mapping. If any of you have played video games, you know that, especially role-playing games, the first thing you do is you find a map. It's funny, my kids don't even know what a map is now. They just use Google Maps and GPS. But a map is finding where something is, okay? So step 5 is to find where the accounts are that you need to be working with and where the people are in those accounts to target. So mapping is finding where. Profiling is finding who. Remember, you got to find the pathway to power and the person with authority, because that's where the gold is. And then lastly, qualifying. Qualifying is finding the other elements that would of the whole ANIM equation: authority, need, urgency, and money. You got to have all 4 if you're going to close the sale. So those are the 7 basic levers of inside sales, and they're pretty much, they just always work. They're like Novocaine, right? It just always works. Okay, so what I want to do now is I got some questions here. Let's look at what the team's given me here and what's showing up on search in the chat window. Give me just a minute. And I'm going to, by the way, I'm going to stay on what I'd love to do is, if you're interested in the slides, over there on the right you'll see the free download section. You could be downloading my slides from today. But let's take some questions here. Has the MIT research changed since 2007? Well, that's a great question. Again, we mentioned that 2011, 2012, Harvard Business Review went clear back through and used 100 times more data and found almost the exact same situation. Now, we have not done a refresh on parts of the MIT study, but just recently, in fact, the end of last year, we went back and refreshed, you know, how fast are people really responding and how persistent are they? And for years, the average the speed had been 39 hours, but last year it's gotten worse, guys. It's now 44 hours. And the average persistency was 1.5 call attempts, and now it's 1.7. So let me just say this, the bar's getting lower. It's not, you know, it's pretty low. So we can make a pretty big impact if we hustle and we use immediacy and persistency. So here's a question. Does the immediacy play work for large companies with complex processes? Well, you know what's interesting? When we ran the original Kellogg, MIT, and Harvard studies, we found that about half the companies were large businesses. And we actually pulled that data out to see if there was much difference. And we actually found the large businesses were slower in responding and had just as much lift. So if there's anything you can do at the enterprise to increase the speed by which you respond and the persistency, it will have a major, major impact. Our friends at ADP are probably the best we've ever seen at this. They saw the vision of this immediacy years ago, and they said, guys, we'd like to have you do a research study on our top 17 websites, and we'd like you to do it every quarter. So we did, and we did what we called our response audit to see how fast their sales reps were responding to their inquiries. And what we found, we helped them find a little bit of a glitch in their website at the time. About 40% of their leads on one of their websites wasn't getting through to the salespeople. So doing that research helped them get an immediate 40% lift. Now, our friends at ADP they're on the very cutting edge of really strong sales best practices, and they've led out and really shown what can be done with both immediacy and persistency at the enterprise level. Next question here. What would be a good ratio for a hybrid model? I.e., what's the number of inside sales reps for each outside rep? Well, you know what we have found is it's really based on what percentage of the overall pipeline are you wanting to come through sales development efforts, for example, and also what percentage of your leads are big enough to warrant the travel costs of going face-to-face. So I'm not sure that I know that answer. I see it anywhere from 1 sales development rep for 4 to 5 outside reps, or even inside reps that are taking leads, to as many as 1 to 1. So, you know, whenever I don't know the answer, I just admit and say, look, I don't know the answer, but I know how to find out. It's a 4-letter word that starts with T, it ends with T, it's pronounced test, and that's what I'd recommend. I would love to hear you guys if you come up with some pretty good ratios on this blend between inside and outside in the hybrid model. So next question, how do I get access to the procrastination study? So there's a link I put on the slide. It's bit.ly/precrastination, okay? So precrastination with an E. And remember, I invented a new word. Procrastination is waiting until the last minute. Precrastination is doing it ahead of time so that you can move up your sales process and take advantage of a higher close rate and a higher average size close. So do you have examples around your acquire model? Yeah, I do actually. In fact, this is one of the most powerful things that I use personally in my social media strategy. Now, just before my accident, I don't know if you remember this, but there was some research done in Huffington Post and Forbes, and our company, InsideSales.com, was ranked #1 for social currency. And what that means, and we didn't even know we were being measured. But what we did that was different than everybody else is we focused on a call to action, which is the engage model of acquire. We like to get people engaged and actually doing something, not just reading about it or hitting the like button or the view button or the friend button. The acquire model is all about moving from awareness to engagement. So that's been a big thing. You're going to see a lot more of that coming out here soon. So I want to reiterate probably the key takeaway today, you guys, is that the high velocity sales model is not the opposite of the account-based model. The high velocity sales model is about doing things faster and doing more of it. Okay, that's what it's about. And we went out to our top 250 accounts, and we've looked closely. And if you look at the high velocity model and the account-based model, we could only find 3 of our top accounts, of the top 250 enterprise class companies, who actually sell to other enterprise companies. 247 of them sell to the small and mid-sized company. That's still where the inside sales world is having the most impact. So inside sales, even if you're an enterprise class organization, you probably need to be looking at the high velocity model. That's why this is so relevant to you. So we've talked about Cadence. We've talked about all the things that go with that. You know, our cool new product that's just killing now is called Playbooks. It's really the next generation of sales acceleration technology. You can learn about it in that free resources window. It's specifically designed to run a cadence strategy in a high velocity model. So again, thank you for joining me today. Sorry this will look a little bit longer, but by the way, we're going to be turning this into an ebook, and this Q&A that we've answered at the end here will be added. So the slides are available in that resource, the free resource download window on the right there. And if you're interested in that research study on procrastination or waiting to the last minute to close, that's at bit.ly/precrastination. Look for me again. I'm getting more involved in these webinars again, guys. I love it. come out to our site and learn more about Inside Sales Labs is offering. You should see a new research study out every month. So once again, thanks you guys, and we'll talk to you soon.